Hello everybody and welcome to Wiki Weekend, where we wind up a wiki, we take a deep dive and we keep swimming until we find something fun to talk about. I'm your host for this episode, Lucas Holland, and I am joined as always by my lovely co-host, Karl Smallwood, inside my walls.
Yes, is that the law now? I'm in the walls. I'm
We're in each other's walls, that's what happens. Like, when one person's on screen, the other person must be in the wall somewhere.
So it's so funny when we record one in person, I have to walk off camera.
We'll have to have the Karl cam of you just in a hollowed out hole in a wall. Just hello.
No, we should have it like that One Punch Man game where if you play One Punch Man, he's just in the corner running to the location. It's just Karl approaching the location at high speed.
See, I was more imagining Lemillion from My Hero Academia of just your little head in a in a wall, just all hello.
Just hey.
Oh, but today we are, of course, recording in December, and I say of course because that's a, relative thing. To me and Karl, it's very obvious, but who knows when you're watching this video at some point in the future.
Yeah, let us know when you are watching it. If you're watching this after December 2024, let us know. How far in the future are you still watching our content?
How long is our legacy going to live on YouTube? Oh, but I did have a Christmassy shirt to wear and then realised that it's a dark blue and would mess with the blue screen. And although my chair does that a little bit, I know that it might get Karl a little bit mad that I've accidentally stolen his gimmick.
I would sue you. That's my gimmick.
So I've brought my Christmassy coloured hair, but that'll have to do. I've not found my Christmas jumper since we moved house, and I've not managed to, put on my Christmas shirt because Karl might come out of the wall and just be like, you can't use my gimmick.
You can't use my gimmick, man.
I can't, but what I can do, Karl, is talk about something that feels very Christmassy to myself.
Okay, and what is this thing that you see as being Christmassy to you, but not necessarily Christmassy overall? Oh, it's the piece of shit N64 controller! So presumably then this is a console you got for Christmas one year when you were younger?
It is indeed, and I don't remember exactly which year we got it because I was probably about 4, maybe 5 years old at the time. However, the Nintendo 64 was the first console I ever got. We had borrowed the SNES, the SNES, whatever you want to call it, from my auntie for a little while, and I've played a bit of Super Mario All-Stars, but again, I would have been about 3 years old, not truly grasping what I was doing at the time. But yeah, I remember one year, me and my sisters, we'd opened up our Christmas presents and we were like, oh, this is great. We went and had our Christmas dinner and whatnot, and I can't remember exactly how they did it. Again, very young, but they left us some kind of note where it was oh, solve a little puzzle, and then it gives you the answer, and the answer was find it under the Christmas tree. And then we went to the Christmas tree and they'd snuck in one extra gift, and that gift was for us all to share, and that was the Nintendo 64.
Is that the Nintendo 64 controller then? That you had as a kid? That's the one.
The one I have still from my childhood, and I also really enjoy the fact that I have a couple of them where they release the Nintendo Switch Online version ones, and again,
yes, I know you had that.
I moved house and I don't remember exactly where I put them right now, but yeah, this is my original wired Nintendo 64 pad right here, one of the two original ones we got.
So I know you have, when they released it for Nintendo Switch, you bought it to play Smash Bros. On, why not play Smash Bros. On an N64 controller? And I guess, first consoles, my family's first console was an Atari 2600. And that shit was high-tech, because it was made of wood.
Yeah, the glossy veneer finish.
The veneer. And then I had an SNES, or SNES, or Super Famicom if you're a huge weeb, which I still have. I still have the controller. If you want to put photos in, I can take a photo because I recently, like yourself, moved house. Mm-hmm. And what I've done is I've created a shelf that has all of my consoles on it with a game and a controller.
Nice.
So I do have my original SNES with the original controller and a bunch of the original games.
And you also have a Super Scope for that, right?
I do have a Super Scope. I originally had an original Super Scope from the 90s, but my ex... it got lost. And then my ex, who was on a visit to Japan, got me a Japanese Nintendo Super Scope. So it won't work with my SNES, but I do own a Super Scope.
And you know that that's in just excellent condition. Yeah,
it's in mint condition. Yeah, if you look at like the coloration on the Super Scope compared to the coloration on my SNES, it's like they look like different devices.
Yeah, I can confirm. I say this is the first console that I ever owned, and obviously when I talk about that console, there's going to be massive rose-tinted lenses and nostalgia just through the ears when I'm talking about
biggest rose-tinted glasses, yes.
Like, yeah, I'm obviously going to be extremely biased when talking about this. It's the first console I really ever owned and played, and it's, you know, it's got all those warm, fuzzy feelings surrounding it.
Look at that. A person biased about a video game console on the internet? Tell me it ain't so. Like, it's weird, though, 'cause so much of like the console warring stuff is just, it's the thing I got when I was 7 years old.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's like that great tweet, isn't it, of like, guys will pick a football team when they're like 7 and let it ruin their fucking life every weekend for like the next 50 years.
Just truly living rent-free in there.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm biased, and I don't want to even make out like I'm objective here. I played like the... Actually, no, yeah, that's the thing. My dad did have a Sega Master System 2. You know, we played a bit of that, and we had a couple of games for that, but I was very young, and by the time like we got our first console, it was the Nintendo 64, so that's... You know, I do own that Sega still. You know, had it passed on to me because my dad doesn't play video games much anymore. But I was the one who just hoarded all the video game consoles for myself when I moved out.
It's like the amount of like disrespect given to these pieces of technology. I said my dad threw away an original Nintendo Super Scope in the box. He didn't think it was worth anything. It's like, Dad, it's worth, like, the box was worth 30 quid. He's like, what? I threw it away. I offered to buy it off him. It's like my mum, she's getting married soon, her fiancé. Mm-hmm. He was just going, like when they were combining their like houses together, he had like a box with an old PlayStation in it. It's like, it's probably not worth anything, is it? And I went, you've got like mint edition copies of like Metal Gear Solid in here.
Oh my God.
That's at least 20 quid. Right there. He's like, what? People pay 20 quid? He's like, people pay I'll pay you 20 quid for it.
I nearly had a heart attack when we went back to my partner's house one time, and they were just like, oh yeah, you know, we can, like, I've asked my siblings, like, they don't mind if we take, like, the PlayStation and the Sega and, like, the games and stuff. And I just nearly died when they were like, oh, here's the PlayStation games, and just picked up one of those, like, zip little cases with all of the CDs just slid into the little plastic folders.
No.
And I was
like, not even in the cases.
Oh, there's no cases left. I was just like, oh, there's just a little folder full of PS1 and 2 games.
So they just didn't give a fuck, did they?
No, and it was just, well, guess what? Grew up in a small house with like multiple siblings. We didn't have space to keep all of these boxes. Like,
and they immediately got broken, right? I've still got like PlayStation games when I was a kid, where the dual case is broken because one of my brothers stepped on it. Mm-hmm. So it was like, my copy of Tekken 3 was just on the floor and someone stepped on it.
Yeah, I only have a few original PS1 games because we did have a PlayStation, but it was one of those, if we got it pretty late, and my dad like knew somebody that could definitely modify it in a totally legal way, and we could play totally legal games that we definitely had boxes for.
Yeah.
I think I've got like 3 games in those original PlayStation 1 boxes, but every single one is broken because you just looked at those things wrong and they're like, ugh.
Yeah.
Game over.
Well, what did you think is the jewel of your like gaming collection crown? Because myself and you, we're not preservationists by any stretch of the imagination, but we do have, I said, nostalgia for the older consoles we owned, and now we're adults with disposable income and a place to store them. We've both tried to rebuild the collection and save what we can from family and friends. So what do you consider the jewel in your collection?
I think that's the one thing that I'm kind of like a bit personally, sad. Not actually that sad, but when, someone asks this kind of question, I'm like, I don't really think I have anything that's of like massive value, because all I have is just old consoles that are, not broken. They're just kind of like, they've been treated relatively well. And then a bunch of old games and controllers of varying different degrees of being looked after. I don't really necessarily have anything that's like, oh, this is super rare, or like, things like a Super Scope or anything like that.
Well, okay, what's the most expensive thing you've thrown away?
I definitely did trade in some relatively valuable games that were like DS games and GameCube games and stuff like that when I was in uni and I had like literally zero money. There were times where I traded in games for food for the week because I didn't have a job or anything, and I was just, admittedly lazy. Years ago, I got rid of like Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, and maybe I got like 30 quid for it on eBay or something. Great, cool. That's some food right there. But nowadays it goes for like at least a couple $100. Yep.
I don't think I've ever had anything that was expensive. It's probably the Nintendo Super Scope, 'cause the box. Because like no Nintendo SNES like game has the box, right? Because they were cardboard. Who the fuck can keep cardboard for like 15, 20, 30 years? So I used to have a few of those boxes. They're all gone. Like when we were kids, we threw those boxes away straight away and just put the cartridges into a stacker box because we were idiots and we didn't care. The jewel of my collection are my 3 copies of Final Fantasy X2. Just because I don't know why I've got 3 copies of a game I don't like. I don't like the game and I have 3 copies of it.
Yeah.
I don't know where they came from, but I've got 3 copies of a game and I don't remember buying them.
See, if this was 10 years ago and you'd made that statement, I would have gone to every, game and CEX and things like that.
Just bought more and kept putting them on my shelf.
Just every time I come around, just like sneak one more in. But the PS2 games, I used to pick up PS2 games on the sheet for like £1 at a time.
You can still buy them relatively cheaply, yeah. And I still do when I go through a shop and if I see like a game that I like have a fondness for and it's a couple of quid, I'll buy it. That's how I ended up with like the Scarface game, because that was quite fun. I ended up with the Total Overdose. Kind of fun, like Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition, picked that up for a couple of quid. And every now and again I do boot it back up. That's why I've got the shelf of gaming. Sometimes you want to play Burnout.
There are a couple of N64 games that I've picked up relatively recently where I just walk past a shop and seen like, oh, 1080-degree snowboarding with the sticker ripped off a little bit for £1. And I'm like, yeah, sure.
Do you know what got me? Game. When I played Spider-Man 2 for the PS2, do you remember the Tobey Maguire one?
Of course, yeah.
So I was like, does it still hold up? The answer is no.
No.
Because I'm playing it on a massive TV. And the web swinging is a little bit clunky. But, do you know what does hold up? The fucking sound effects when Spider-Man twats someone.
I thought you were just going to say the voice lines.
Spider-Man is a hero, not a crook. There's no way you'll get that picture.
But anyway, going to the actual Wikipedia page for the Nintendo 64 here.
Yes.
The N64 is a home video game console developed and marketed by Nintendo. It was released in Japan on June 23rd, 1996, in North America on September 29th, 1996, and in Europe and Australia on March 1st, 1997.
So you'd have been, if you got it the year it was released, you'd have been 92, it's about 5-6 years old?
So, as far as I'm remembering, I think we got Diddy Kong Racing as one of the games that we got with the Nintendo 64.
That's a good game to start with.
Yeah.
But you started your gaming journey right, because the first game we had for the SNES was Killer Instinct.
That's a really good game, but it's not a game for children, really.
No. It's also not a game children can play, because I always get my fucking ass kicked by Gargos.
Yeah, like, it's a little bit mature for children anyway, and also it's just difficult to play.
It's bastard hard, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it did give me my appreciation of strong female characters with Riptor. Like, no better than doing some Riptor combos.
Diddy Kong Racing was released in 1997. So I am presuming that we got it in 97, as I have vague memories of getting Ocarina of Time on release as well, which was 1998. So I do think we got it the year that it came out, which is, rad as hell. Thank you, parents.
And I should clarify as well, me and Lucas are roughly the same age, or a year younger than I am. The reason why the consoles that I had are much older is because I was a console generation behind. All of our consoles were inherited. With the exception of, I think we had a Master System or a Mega Drive, I forget which one. And it's because I'm going to drop some Karl lore right now, some Karl Christmas lore. I was in hospital over Christmas. I don't remember which age it was, but I had my appendix out. My appendix burst on Christmas Eve.
Right.
And I remember my parents felt really bad because if anyone's ever had their appendix burst, it fucking sucks. Singularly one of the most painful things I've ever experienced. And I was at my mum's work Christmas party, and I was being like in the corner, just moaning. I'm like, oh, I want to go home. And I remember my mum yelled at me, like, oh, you ruined my Christmas party. I hope you're happy. Then in the middle of the night, she walks into me and my brother's bedroom, and the floor is caked in sick because I've just vomited up my guts and get rushed to hospital. I was like, oh, your son's appendix has burst, needs surgery right now. And I was in hospital over Christmas, and I remember my parents coming looking really sheepish. Of like, is there anything you're going for Christmas, Kat? I remember just going, Master System. I had enough wherewithal about me. Like, you know what? I get one chance. I've got one chance. What a Sega.
Give me a video game console. It's like, oh, we can't really. Oh.
Yeah, you get one chance to use that right of like your parents feeling super guilty. It's like, I'm going to take advantage and get me a Mega. It's the only new console we ever got as a kid.
It's very funny because I think it was around New Year's that I had my appendix out. And mine didn't burst, but they were like very close to bursting. And it was like, thank God you got here in time kind of thing. And I have vivid memories of my, appendix surgery happening and then going down to like the ward where they had a game console and playing Soul Blade for the first time, which is like the precursor to Soul Calibur, right? And just all of a sudden, I just have vague memories again of like playing with like Cervantes or something like that, and just I do not know what this game is, but it's cool as hell. And then I got out of the hospital and was like, what was that game? Just what did I just experience?
The grueling battle ended with the victory of Wiki. You win.
That game for me is when I was younger on holiday, and there's sometimes like the kids' room, like you put the kids in when you want to go get pissed. Like me and my brother were in there, and the game we ended up playing, that was like the game, like what the fuck is this game? Was Metal Slug. Where me and my brother played it for like hours and hours and hours, and we didn't remember what the name was. And I just remember for years being like, what the fuck was that game I played with my brother on holiday? And years later I found out it was Metal Slug.
It's really funny going back to the N64. Had some Mario games at the time and had played like the 2D Mario games, but we didn't have Mario 64. And
the game that was named after the console it was on.
Many of them were though, right? In the N64 days, and like even with the Super Nintendo, right? Of so many games were just Super something like Super Contra or whatever.
I'm so baffled that Nintendo didn't keep up that naming convention and suffix. Why is the Wii U not called the Super Wii? Well, why is the Switch 2 not called the Super Switch?
The reason is that the Super Nintendo just sold a lot less than the SNES did, right?
I want them to use the Super suffix again. Or prefix, I suppose. It's prefix.
I would really like them to put Super at the start of the console again, but it's just, the Super Nintendo sold a lot less than Nintendo did. So
I just fucking hate the idea of numbering your consoles. It's so much less whimsical. I hate that phones are now just phone name 3, phone name 6.
Yeah.
PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So give them fun names.
Well, it's the classic joke, isn't it? I can't believe they made 64 Nintendo consoles. But going back to Super Mario 64, I do remember having this experience of going around to a friend's house and playing this magical Mario game that broke my brain.
Easily one of the best games ever made, right?
Yeah. especially at the time. It's a bit clunky with the camera, but for people who are used to playing it, I think it still holds up. But I think it is a bit rough if you were like a brand new player to it, I do think.
But the amount of like fidelity, of like control you have over Mario is almost unparalleled in that era. And to this day, as I said, it holds up with some minor issues with camera.
Yeah, his actual moveset itself to this day is still just a peak set of, moveset for a 3D platformer. But yeah, I remember going home and telling my parents, I just played this game and I think it had Mario in it. And you jump around. And they were just like, how are we meant to know what that game is? Like, we had Mario Kart, we were aware what Mario was. I'd say, we'd played plenty of Super Mario All-Stars. It's not like we didn't know Mario. It's just me as a child coming home being like, oh, this Mario game is amazing. It's like, that doesn't really help us. And just for years, I didn't actually get to play Super Mario 64 again. I never went round to that person's house again. And
they didn't want Lucas back.
I think literally they didn't, because I think what happened was they showed me Super Mario 64 and I just pushed that person to the side and was like, this is the next 5 hours of my life, thank you.
I'm playing Mario 64 right the fuck
I'm
now.
just ignoring you. It's Mario time.
Well, that's how I ended up getting into Super Metroid. It was a next door neighbour. They wanted to borrow Killer Instinct and I borrowed Super Metroid off them. And then they moved. And my brothers really like Killer Instinct, and they got mad at me, so the only game they'd let me play was Super Metroid. And anytime I tried to play another game, they'd come in and turn the console off, like, no, you play the game that you got. So all I do is just endlessly replay Super Metroid. That's how I became obsessed with it.
It's like, you did this to yourself, Carl.
Yeah. It's like, oh no, I have to keep replaying this super sick, awesome game. Oh, I don't get to play the shitty Super Scope missions on Yoshi's Island.
I have to fucking play one of the greatest games of all time on loop. I'm so sorry.
Oh no.
The Nintendo 64 was the successor to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and it was the last major home console to use a ROM cartridge as its primary storage format. And
bring them back.
People may be going, oh, but what about the Nintendo Switch? And specifically, the Nintendo Switch doesn't use cartridges. It uses a card. And that's a very, very, specific difference of, but it's not a cartridge. You're using it essentially off, a glorified SD card, right?
Yeah, it's a distinction. Minor, admittedly, but it's still a distinction.
It is, yeah. And that means that, to this day, yes, the Nintendo 64 still holds that title, but as a...
Bring it back.
We don't need it.
Is there anything more satisfying than just going, BAM, when you hit, it feels like technology. I love the tactile sensation of technology that you interact with that's robust. Technology that feels like it fucking works.
I do agree that the tactile feel is nice, and the modern equivalent on the Switch, they do have a good feel where you give that little click in with the
There's a little bit of push and you feel it click in, it grabs it.
So it does have a nice feel of popping your Switch games in that, but it's not the same as just clunking it in, yeah.
There's just a tactile sensation to it, like sliding a disc in is never felt. 'Cause I always feel like when I'm doing it with a disc, I've never once felt secure putting a disc into a console.
Oh, but
I always feel like I'm going to fucking scratch it.
I do like more modern disc drives. I remember, I think it was probably the Wii, the first console that I'd played, where it did this, where it, grabs the disc from you and is like, whoop, and just sucks
I
it
hate
in.
that. Because on the PlayStation 5, every time I put a disc in, I put it in the wrong way, and it sounds like it's going to fucking explode. And it's like,
you just put it face up.
My PlayStation 5 stood up straight.
Oh, don't put it vertically, Carl. You might melt the insides.
And that's the problem though, because I've never, and every time I put the disc in the wrong way, I think it's going to eat my disc. Do you know what I've never done put in the wrong way? A fucking cartridge.
I'd be impressed, just Carl sitting there just jamming it in the wrong way around. It won't work. Why won't it work? But the N64 is a 5th generation console, and the Nintendo 64 primarily competed with Sony's PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. I think that saying that it competed with Sony's PlayStation is maybe quite generous.
It's not fair, right? And I guess the industry law is that Nintendo were going to be the ones who made the PlayStation. They were
with Sony.
Sony were going to collaborate with Nintendo to make a disc-based console, but for some reason I don't know the exact story. Maybe one day we could talk about it. But it's like conversation broke down, right? And Sony realized they had so much invested in it, they might as well just make it themselves.
Famously, not that long ago, a few years ago, or whatever, it was probably like 10 years or something.
Probably, yeah.
I'm gonna feel really old when I Google this, but somebody came across a like Nintendo PlayStation, which was
they found the prototype, right?
like this prototype that was basically just a Super Nintendo, but with a disc drive on the front. It had like PlayStation kind of branded on there and stuff, and it's very cool and very strange, and I'll obviously put like a picture in or a clip in of that now.
Here she is. The PlayStation Nintendo Super Disc. Not fake.
Is that as well one of like just the biggest mistakes in the history of like business?
I think
Have they effectively created their own competition?
maybe very temporarily, but I do think that looking back, for the sake of the health of the entire video game industry, that was like a fantastic thing to happen to us, the general like consumer and gamer, because we end up with two very healthy brands, and the other one, the Sega Saturn, whereas like, womp womp.
Please tell the Sega Saturn story of how it just died on its ass with the price. That's one of the funniest, speaking of business mistakes, that's one of the funniest fucking stories. Because
there was a lot of problems with the Sega Saturn, and I'm sure we'll cover it someday, but one of the like last nails in its coffin, so to speak, was just, I think they were announcing at E3 that it was coming out and it was going to be $299, and they were like launching it early to try and get a jump over PlayStation, but then they hadn't told retailers or worked any of that out.
So there were no games being released around the same time.
They pissed everyone off in the retail space, like no one was ready for it, and then there was a ton of problems. I'll say it's a full episode that we can talk about properly, but as far as I'm aware, the response from PlayStation or Sony was to just walk onto stage and just say like $199 and walk back off.
$299.
It's $100 cheaper and it's got Wipeout.
I wonder whether it did have Wipeout at launch.
Wipeout was one of the launch games.
Was it, yeah?
Yeah, because they wanted to sell the fact it did music. So that's why they got real artists to do music. It's one of the... People often forget at the PlayStation, one of its big selling points is, well, it's using a CD. CDs can hold more data. They can hold entire albums. That's why they released Wipeout. Like, you get a full album with your game.
Yeah, it was an album where you can play through the album with just sick, futuristic racing cars.
And that's one thing that PlayStation has generally been at the forefront of making their consoles just good, solid devices. Like the PlayStation 1 was a CD player, one of the best CD players money can buy. The PS2 played DVDs. It was one of the cheapest and just best DVD players money could buy at the time. PlayStation 3, Blu-ray.
The first three generations were examples of, here is a CD, DVD, or Blu-ray player, respectively, that is cheaper than the rest of the market for the most part, or at least good devices of those in the market.
Yep.
And also it plays video games, so you're getting a 2-for-1 bargain. Yeah.
Not to mention as well, just Sony generally has a pretty good reputation when it comes to audiovisual equipment.
You would hope so, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So when it's like, oh, we released it, like it's a Sony-branded CD player that also plays video games. It's a Sony-branded DVD player that also plays video games. It's a Sony-branded Blu-ray player that also plays video games.
Mm-hmm. That is something that we can talk about, but that's what partly blew Nintendo out of the water. Part of it was also just, PlayStation coming out earlier, I think cheaper. Also, they had Crash Bandicoot talking shit, just absolute mad shit on Nintendo in their
Please put in those clips. Put in the clips of the guy they got to dress up like Crash Bandicoot, and he drove to Nintendo headquarters and just stood outside with a megaphone calling them pussies.
Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
Pack up your stuff. I got a little surprise for you here. Check it out.
One day we need to do an episode on just marketing for video games.
Anyway, Carl, going back to the N64, development began in 1993 in partnership with Silicon Graphics, using the codename Project Reality. And then a test model and arcade platform called Ultra 64, which is what a lot of people are probably familiar with, seeing like early Space World videos of like the Ultra 64, and then it later became the Nintendo 64, and the final design was named after a 64-bit CPU, which aided in the console's 3D capabilities. And I remember just back in the day it was like, oh, this is 16-bit and 32-bit and 64-bit, and now it's just everything's 64-bit. We just kind of hit that barrier, and it was always like, I wonder what consoles in the future, like how many bits are going to be in them, and it's still just like 64 bits.
It was a lot of triangles, though. My mind was blown when I just saw the breakdown of like every model in every video game. It's just made of triangles. It can't be made of triangles. Like, it was just a lot of fucking triangles. It's like learning like all computing is just zeros and ones. It's like, no, it can't be just zeros and ones. It is. There's a fucking lot of them.
And that's the thing, is there's different levels of languages that we then program with that basically make it easier for us to tell the computer what zeros and ones to use, but ultimately when you break it all the way down, it's still just zeros and ones.
And I can't understand. My head still cannot wrap around the idea of it just being zeros and ones.
You don't need to understand it. You just need to be able to play the game and enjoy it. Don't worry too much about it, right? It's just the smarter people than us that they will figure that out. The N64's design was mostly complete by mid-1995, and the launch was delayed until 1996 for the completion of the launch games Super Mario 64, Pilot Wings 64, and then a Japanese exclusive game, Saigyo Habo Shogi, I believe. And count them, that's 3 games, and then for us, 2.
Yep.
2 games.
Which is not really a good way to launch something. So what about if you don't want to play one of those 2 games? Whereas PlayStation launched with quite an eclectic selection. I think one of the things that PlayStation did as well that was really, really handy, they don't really do it much anymore, was they had a demo disc. Every PlayStation came with a demo disc that had a selection of other games. So you could preview what you could play on it. And I thought, that's genius, right?
Yeah, there was so many magazines that I got just so that I could get a new demo disc, and every single one seemingly had like 10 games on them for varying different genres for you to try out. And
yeah, well, PlayStation, the console, launched with one. And I talked earlier, like my mum's fiance was throwing stuff away. He had that original demo disc.
Man.
Which is like, it only came with like the console. But I thought, what a genius idea as well, because it was CDs, and CDs cost fucking nothing. They weren't proprietary like the cartridges for Nintendo. I said they could just slap a demo disc in a magazine.
You can talk about the demo discs and the launch lineup of the PlayStation and stuff. However, arguably, to this day, Super Mario 64 might just be the greatest launch game for any console
it is true,
ever.
Yes. But I do appreciate PlayStation's shotgun approach too, and especially the idea of giving people a preview of what the new console can do, like selling it as a device, not just a game playing device. Like, because that demo disc, one of the reasons they released it is to showcase like the musical playing capabilities of it. Like, for example, you've probably booted up your PlayStation 5, Lucas. You get the new intro, right, of like 30 years of PlayStation.
That hits some nostalgia right
it
there.
Does.
Yeah.
And something that was pointed out to me years ago now, that I couldn't believe I never noticed it, is the PlayStation 1 intro is a digital symphony warming up.
Yeah, like, it's there to showcase how amazing the audio is on the PlayStation, right?
Yeah, it's a digital symphony.
Yeah.
Of like the string section just warming up a little bit.
Just something that you'll never really think about, but you'll definitely notice.
And it's the first thing anyone would see when they boot it up. And the one for me that always struck me as really impressive was the Xbox one, like the original fat Xbox, where it's just like the glowing orb, which is a really impressive visual effect for the time.
Yeah.
And it was just to showcase like the new lighting engines and stuff you could do on the console.
Yeah, managing to just show off something cool that the console can do in a very quick and easy to explain manner.
I also like the idea that it hinted that there's like some sort of living entity within your Xbox. I always felt like it's like that's inside my Xbox. Like it's just orb of power that has to be contained by the console.
Is it an orb of power or is it just flubber?
It's flubber.
It's flubber. But I think it really probably goes to kind of like foreshadow what will then happen for the next couple of generations, right? Where, oh look, PlayStation's got this shotgun approach, as you say, of just a absolute litany of so many games of varying quality and different genres, and like, again, the most widespread shotgun approach you can have. And then Nintendo being like, yeah, but there's one really fucking good game on this console.
Like, we'll launch a console that has a Mario, and there'll be a Pokemon game a year later. It's like, yeah, and admittedly, that approach works. I bought my Switch to play Smash Bros.
Never forget that temporarily at launch of the Nintendo Switch, Breath of the Wild had sold more copies than Switches.
Yeah.
There was like 3 million Nintendo Switches sold, but like 3.3 million Breath of the Wild sold.
Yeah.
It's like,
because people have bought the game, even though there was a shortage of Switches, in anticipation of owning a Switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or obviously a little bit of people buying like the collector's edition and the digital version or something like that as well, of course. The charcoal grey console was followed by a series of colour variants. One thing that I am very mad about, the fact that we got the base, boring, the charcoal grey variant.
We always get the shit version, right?
And it's like, I always love so many of the other colorways that the Nintendo 64 and the controllers got, but it was a case of, well, we got you 2 controllers and the console, we can't afford to get you any others now, so deal with it.
Yeah, that's the best one, the Pikachu one.
No, the Pikachu one's not the best one. It's the the nice aqua with white on the bottom, like the translucent aqua one, which I'll put a picture up of.
Speaking of bring back like that trend of like the translucent technology. I want phones to do that. Like, every now and again you see those like mock-ups of, what about if they made an iPhone that had the same like design ethos as the iMac, where it had like the colourful back, but it was like translucent, so you see the technology inside.
Little bit of a hot take though is that I think that due to the simplicity of the older controllers, for example, translucent controllers used to look better because you could kind of tilt them around and see every single individual mechanic, rather than now when you do have like, collector's editions where it's like translucent controllers, they're so crammed full that it's hard to really tell what's doing what.
Yeah. Although I do appreciate the aesthetic of that look.
Yeah, and again, I think how cramped they are, though. The modern controllers, there's so much technology, it kind of dims the colour and the look of the translucent plastic a little bit more.
Light tends to pass through it a lot less, right? Mm-hmm. So I understand why they don't do it. I think it is a very cool visual.
One of my favourite aesthetics is, even looking back at those, the whatever Mac computers it was, I'd kind of like to have one of those just as a display piece, regardless of the fact that I have no real affinity for Apple or Mac or anything. Just the look of those old Macs. I
just wish technology was colourful. Yes. I hate that technology has become, it's a grey, black or white rectangle. It's like, I've already got like 15 grey, black or white rectangles. Can I have a colourful rectangle?
That's what kind of really annoys me about my collection of N64 stuff, is that I've just got all the grey things, whereas it was such a colourful console.
Yep. And it's especially for a games console, especially early games consoles, like the Nintendo ones, where they were sold on the fact, like, okay, PlayStation's going for like realism, grey, brick grey, realism. Okay, got it. Nintendo, colourful, whimsical, Mario, Pokemon, F-Zero, colourful, bright, vibrant. What colour's the console? It's a grey brick. We
will talk about the games, but briefly, we just have to mention the prop that I have brought with me today, that is the actual controller itself.
Gets memed on a lot.
It does, and it looks archaic, and it isn't the best, but I can definitely see where they were coming from, where they were at a transitional point between 2D games being the popular medium and introducing new 3D games like Super Mario 64. So I can understand the kind of thinking around it of, well, if I'll try my best to, if you want to play 2D games, you're mainly going to be using the D-pad and holding it like this, and you've got the left button on the shoulder here and the D-pad. And if you're playing 3D games, then you'll probably be using the analog stick. and then you've essentially got the shoulder button underneath.
Yeah, if the moment you understand the design ethos behind the N64 controller, it makes perfect sense. If you do you happen to have like another controller near you, like a more modern one, where if you show on that like the thumbstick and the D-pad are about the same distance away from each other as they are on the N64 controller, right? If you hold them up like side by side, like that white Xbox controller.
Yeah, like not
You
far.
you can see the design ethos taking place, right? And the fact that it has that, people always make fun of like the third stick in the middle, like you need 3 hands to hold. It's like, no, if you're playing 2D games, you have it on one hold. It's just, yeah, it makes sense. It's a device for children as well.
And I don't get me wrong, I think it looks dumb, and it's something I've got a lot of nostalgia for, so I think it looks dumb in a very fun way. But when you look at this thing, it's like, how the hell is this meant to make sense? I don't have 3 hands, but it's just, for the most part, with nearly every single game, your right hand was always on the right hand side, and it was just using the analog stick or the D-pad. And then, admittedly, some games tried to use a bit of
both,
everything, and
which is what made it worse. Yeah, like, but if you like said you put it right next to another controller, you take away that like middle bit, you move like the analog stick just a little bit to the left and a little bit up. It's basically a modern controller, and Nintendo
with one stick, of course.
Yeah, Nintendo almost had it.
They were a lot closer than
PlayStation
you would
got.
think. Than when you look at that controller, you look at that and you go, "That is like absolute anarchy. Why do you need 3 different prongs on a controller?" But in practice, when you were actually using it and playing it, it did make more sense for the most part.
Also, as well, if you compare it to PlayStation's example of the original DualSense, where the 2 analog sticks were too low down, so you couldn't press buttons or move.
The original DualShock.
DualSense is the newest one, right? Yeah, but
the DualSense is the new one. I hate the fact that they changed it from DualShock 1, 2, 3, 4 to DualSense. But anyway.
But those analog sticks are too close together, so you can't use them both at the same time. The modern...
You can, but it's not the most comfy thing. And bear in mind that the DualShock didn't even come out until I think it was like 1998 or 99 or something. They didn't have any analog sticks on that PlayStation controller for like 4 years or something.
So an analog sticks eventually became the standard, which Nintendo did predict, and also modern controllers, near enough every single one on every console has the offset stick design. Nintendo almost got that right as well. 2 decades ahead of time.
Yeah, and then obviously they did have the offset sticks with the GameCube, so they weren't that far off it. They were pretty much in line with everyone else using offset double sticks, right?
And again, if you look at the Nintendo GameCube and you just put it next to another controller, you can pretty much see Nintendo fucking nailed it. The idea of, the A button's bigger, because the A button is the single most commonly pressed button. Of course it's bigger.
And Carl, I'm also going to say just something that I just scrolled past, where I love the aqua translucent one, but I also forgot about this baby.
What's this?
And
Let's have a
it
look.
is the translucent orange.
I'd want that. Again, I'd want that on a shelf.
Fire orange Nintendo 64. It looks so rad. We will have to do a separate thing, where we maybe talk specifically. Maybe we'll make a podcast episode or something about Nintendo 64 games or something like that. But just off the top of your head, name your favourite Nintendo 64 game. Maybe that isn't
GoldenEye.
Okay, I was gonna say maybe that isn't Super Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time, because they're the 2, right?
Even though it's aged poorly, because it was in that time they'd not figured out first-person controls yet. Where if you go back and play it, it's impossible. Because
you didn't have dual sticks, right?
You didn't have dual sticks, and every time you walk forward, your aim resets. Which is why Oddjob was so broken in that game, because when you moved, your viewpoint automatically resets facing directly forward, and Oddjob being shorter was always below your reticle to shoot.
And I absolutely love that a bunch of developers from GoldenEye became Free Radical, who made Time Splitters, and they continued that gimmick with the monkey characters and such.
Yeah, but though in the Time Splitters games, you could aim freely, or you could aim freely more easily.
Yeah,
to a
in
degree.
Time Splitters 2, it was still
a bit clunky.
Difficult, yeah. So it was really Time Splitters 3 where they got to proper dual stick controls.
Yeah, which is just it's a relic, but I do have fond memories of playing GoldenEye 64 at my cousin's house with my brothers.
Same, yeah, and I have very fond memories of playing Super Smash Brothers. I was about to say Melee, because that's just like defaulted into my brain, but just Super Smash Bros. On the N64, and I think I've mentioned this before, of like I went round to a different friend's house who did, the one that banned me from the house for just stealing Super Mario 64 from them. I basically literally did to another friend with Smash Bros, where they let me play Smash Bros. I was like, oh my god, this is just
the greatest game
crack
ever.
Cocaine to my brain. And they were just like, do you want to just take it home? I don't play it. And then I took it home until Super Smash Bros. Melee came out like 2 years later.
Which
and
never
then
asked
gave
for it
them
back.
back the N64 game.
That's why I ended up with Devil May Cry. Like Devil May Cry 3, my friend Lindsay didn't really like it that much. And when he kept asking me, like, have you beaten it yet? It's like, no. In reality, I've beaten it 3 times. I just don't want to get it back. It's like, you keep my copy of FIFA that I nicked off my brother.
They literally never bothered me about it once. I even gave it back to them and they were like, oh yeah, I forgot I had this, thanks. Like they couldn't have cared less, but I couldn't have cared more about Super Smash Bros. And I guess
you deserve it, Lucas. You wanted it more.
I did, but everyone in the comments, let us know what your favourite Nintendo 64 game is. And as I say, just maybe miss out the 4 that have already been mentioned, like any that are outside the relic of like GoldenEye, Smash Bros, Mario 64, and Ocarina of Time. Like, what other games should we give credence to? And like, just prop up in the comments, because it's a small library of games, but it's a very solid library when you get to like the good ones.
Yeah, and no one's allowed to mention my game of picking the controller up by the cable and swinging it around above your head. I always wanted that game.
And I think it's quite a fun controller to do that with, right? Same with like the PlayStation 1, where you got quite a hefty little weight at the end
I
as
meant
well.
the actual controller itself.
Oh, the actual, like, you're swinging it like that way.
You get beaten by Oddjob slaps only enough times, you'll start fucking swinging that shit around as well, mate. You get Oddjobbed, or when like my brother, who always knew where the laser spawned, would get the laser as Oddjob and just shoot you in the penis with like Oddjob.
One last thing to round out our discussion on the N64 here is just mad props to building a console, and a lot of them did back in the day, right, where just the controller itself, as you can see here, had like an expansion port on it. The top of the N64 had an expansion port on it. The bottom of the N64 had expansion ports on it, and just obviously there was a cancelled Nintendo 64 disc drive that only came out in Japan and got almost immediately scrapped and all that. That like the Nintendo clicked on top of that entire base. You've got things that went in the back, like the memory cards or the Rumble Pack. The one that I use the most, which is the transfer pack for Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2, where you could plug in your Game Boy copies of Pokemon into the controller at the back, and then it would read that data and you could use your Pokemon in Pokemon Stadium.
Also, as well, the fact that by default it had the ability to support 4 players.
Yes, yeah, really important distinction there is that nobody I know had a PlayStation 1 multi-tap, so you had to play 2-player, even when you had, a few friends around at your house, but you were always able to play 4-player GoldenEye or Smash Bros, provided that somebody brought round their third-party turbo controller that barely works or something like that, right? It was always some, maybe not Mad Cats back in the day, maybe that was a bit too early for Mad Cats, but there was always just the cheap rip-off controllers that people didn't want to play with.
I'll never forget for my SNES, one of the controllers I've still got is one that had a turbo button on it. And it had which would make whatever turbo button, people don't know, it makes sure every time you press the button, it would just press it as many times as the game would allow. So when you're playing like a game like, R-Type or Gradius, it's like... But it also had a slow-mo button. Yeah. And the slow-mo button would just pause the game over and over and over again.
Because those buttons worked more so for like maybe like the old school Sega games. I remember there's like a physical pause button on, I think, the Mega Drive or the Master System or something, where it would just literally freeze frame the game. It wouldn't necessarily bring up a pause menu or anything.
But when you put that option on like Mario, and it's not slow-mo, it's just pausing the game over and over again. I'll tell you what, that was really handy when you're playing Street Fighter or something with your brother, and you want to throw him off. It's like he's about to throw a fireball. Slow motion. And that's when the controller starts getting spun around above the head.
God. And I remember we had, we don't have it anymore, it broke unfortunately, but we had like a turbo controller for the N64, and just here were a load of different settings where it was like each individual button you could flip to like the turbo mode, so you could literally turbo any of like these buttons or anything. And I never really utilised that, apart from very occasionally with Mario Party with my sisters. I never told them turbo controllers existed. But the button mashing minigames, I'd just like sneakily turn the turbo mode on and just be like, I guess I'm just better at mashing the button than you. Even though you could literally like just have turned to the side and see me just holding a button.
Yeah.
That caused many an argument. I wonder what caused more arguments in which household, like the odd jobs in GoldenEye or the turbo buttons in Mario Party.
Just odd jobs, man. As soon as like someone picked odd job, it's like it was always my older brother as well. It's like you're already 6 years older than me. Like he's just beasting on a child as odd job.
Is that not enough of a handicap already?
It's not sad. So I'm like, it was always like I just punch him in the dick. Do you like proper Malcolm in the Middle style where just run, boom, just annihilate the testicle? It's like, yeah, that's what you get picking odd job.
I thought you were talking about like in game, and I was like, they never punched Carl. It was always like
slap, yeah.
Oh God! But thank you all for joining, and I hope we all see you soon.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah.